a manga, or especially an anime, comes with an almost infinite amount of difficulties. You have to write a compelling story, interesting characters, you have to avoid tropes that people find cliche and tacky, and in the ever-changing landscape of what anime watchers and manga readers want in terms of consumption, you have to keep your fingers directly on that pulse to figure out what kind of story you need to write to be successful. Not to mention, as the moralities of anime and manga consumers worldwide change, you have to identify that incredibly popular tropes or cliches that would have made a popular anime or manga in the 90s and early 2000s are no longer acceptable. On top of that, it becomes harder every single year to write what many consumers would identify as a unique story. See, because as it currently stands, we are in the golden age of anime and manga. There is more anime and manga being made today than ever before. But as more and more and more of this content is created, unfortunately, some things need to be recycled. And this is not a new problem. Every big anime and manga in the history of anime and manga production has caught allegations of copying something. Naruto was said to be a copy of Hunter x Hunter because Sasuke's character so closely resembles the character of Kurapika. JJK has caught allegations of being a copy of Naruto and Bleach. And Black Clover has caught allegations of being a direct copy and paste of Naruto. And thus it feels as though every single time an anime blows up, that anime is going to be actively compared to its predecessors, which explains why Solo Leveling is currently catching those allegations. See, the Solo Leveling anime is pretty deep into its second season right now, and anime-only watchers are currently hurtling their way towards what is one of the better, I guess you could call it, arcs in Solo Leveling, which is the Jeju Island raid. But as all these anime-only watchers are watching the Japanese and Korean S-ranks cut through ants, they can't help but point something out. And that thing is the idea of incredibly powerful ants popping up out of nowhere and taking over a part of a country sounds like a slightly familiar concept. And the more the fans are looking into this Jeju Island arc, the more they're realizing that it's got a lot of similarities to the Chimera Ant arc. And thus, over the last couple of days, if not weeks, Solo Leveling has been catching copycat allegations. And for a show so universally praised for being a unique take on the power fantasy genre, the idea that this manhwa was actually taking notes from Togashi the whole time has thrown a lot of fans into a tizzy. But is Solo Leveling truly copying the Chimera Ant arc? Do the ants of Jeju Island truly that closely resemble the Chimera ants of Hunter x Hunter? Are their powers and dynamics that truly similar to that of the Chimera ants? Are the story beats of the Jeju Island raid and the Chimera Ant arc so similar that Solo Leveling deserves these copycat allegations? And what are the key similarities between these two arcs? Well, today we're going to be answering those questions in a whole lot more, because today we're talking Solo Leveling is copying Hunter x Hunter. But before we get to kicking the beehive, or I guess the anthill of what is quickly becoming one of the biggest factions of anime fans on Earth, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. So, we're on to the Jeju Island arc, the arc that's been being hyped up for the entirety of Season 2. Well, a lot has been going on in Season 2 of Solo Leveling, like Jinwoo cutting his way through the Red Gate arc, slicing his way through the Demon Castle, and acquiring shadow soldiers like Kamish, Tusk, Iron. For the entirety of Season 2, it's felt like we've been hyping up the idea of Jeju Island, an island off the southern coast of South Korea that's been completely taken over by the collapse of an S-ranked gate. But how did Jeju Island get overrun by ants in the first place? Where did this S-rank gate come from, and what did its collapse mean for Korea? And maybe more importantly than anything, what happened to the 3 first expeditions that tried to take this gate on? In order to understand if Solo Leveling is truly copying Hunter x Hunter, understanding the answer to all of these questions is very important. So let's quickly go over the history of Jeju Island in Solo Leveling and its S-ranked gate, so we can build out the exact idea of what's going on in this island to see, once and for all, if the Jeju Island arc truly bears an unforgivable amount of resemblance to the Chimera Ant arc. So like with many story beats in the Solo Leveling anime, the manhwa does a slightly better job of explaining what's going on. I'm not saying that the anime is doing a bad job at explaining the story of Solo Leveling. It isn't. However, when it comes to backstories, world-building exposition, and the explanation of how moves function, the anime does move at kind of a somewhat breakneck pace, which can absolutely leave anime-only watchers kind of scratching their head as to what's going on. So let's start at the very beginning. Jeju Island's important history in the Solo Leveling universe starts about 4 years before the main timeline begins, when an S-rank gate spawns on the island. Now, immediately when the gate opened, Korea sent a strike force of S and A ranked hunters to close it. And as Korea had never closed an S-rank gate before, this was a massive breakwater moment in Korea's hunter history, as only genuine powerhouse countries in the Solo Leveling world, like the United States, China, and Russia, had been able to close S-ranked gates prior to this event. And this is one because S-ranked gates are exceedingly exceedingly rare, and 2, because closing them is damn near an impossibility. In fact, it is so incredibly difficult to close an S-rank gate that those who are actually able to close an S-rank gate become known as national level hunters, of which there's only currently 5. Well, actually, there's only currently 4. There's eventually 5. 2 from America, 1 from China, and 1 from India. I think I might have said Russia earlier when I said people who have closed S-rank gates. I believe India is the 3rd country, actually.
As Siddharth Bachchan, who never appears in the manhwa but whose name we know,
is the 4th and final national level hunter. However, unfortunately, the initial strike force sent by Korea to close the S-ranked gate was not strong enough to close it. And because of this, the majority of the S ranks and A ranks that were sent by Korea to close this gate ended up dying. And because Korea had sent pretty much the bulk of all of their strongest hunters to their deaths, they basically had nobody else to send in the coming week, and therefore the S-rank gate underwent a gate collapse. And thus all of the magic beasts within that S-rank gate were able to break out of the gate and take over Jeju Island, resulting in the deaths of thousands of Korean citizens and the destruction of Jeju Island. Over the course of the next 3 years, the Korean government would send 3 more separate raid attempts, with every single one ending in abject failure. And thus the reason that Korea doesn't appear to have that many S ranks is 1, because South Korea is a relatively small country, only having about 35 million people in the entire country, and 2, because a lot of their A and S ranks have died in combat on Jeju Island against the ants. And while we basically know nothing about the first 2 raid attempts, we do know an okay-ish amount about the 3rd raid attempt. The raid attempt that included Min Byung-gyu, Baek Yoon-ho, and Choi Jung-in. So the anime has actually done more to show this 3rd raid than the manhwa did, as basically all we got from the manhwa as it pertains to the 3rd attempt to retake Jeju Island was that it happened and that an S-rank hunter who was massively beloved by the Korean public and the Korean government, Yoon Suk, died during it. Now, Yoon Suk was one of the most talented hunters in all of Korea, a powerful mage who wielded lightning magic. However, it was his death in the 3rd Jeju Island raid that demoralized the Korean government and made them take the approach of laissez-faire when it came to Jeju Island, hoping that the magical beast ants would simply run out of food on the magical island and starve themselves to death. However, as we saw in season 2, the ants slowly began to adapt, eventually spawning wings on their back that allowed for them to fly the incredibly long distance between Jeju Island and the Korean/Japanese mainlands. Thus, in response to this threat, the Drawn Sword Guild, the biggest and most powerful hunter guild in all of Japan, agreed to collaborate with the Korean government and their S-rank hunters to re-raid Jeju Island with the hopes of this time eradicating all of the ants and eliminating the threat to both Korea and Japan. And thus the Jeju Island raid party of 16 S-ranked hunters was formed, 11 from Japan and 5 from Korea. And while this raid starts off very well with the Japanese hunters ripping through the low-level ants and the Korean hunters cutting their way through the Queen's guards to blaze a trail to the Queen to cut off the reproduction system of these magical beast ants, things quickly go sideways, as it's revealed that the Ant Queen is not the major threat on this island, and rather it's the Ant King, the final and most powerful child of the Ant Queen, the embodiment of power and evolution created by the Queen to advance the ant strengths far beyond that of humans. And it's at this point that the story starts to sound a bit like Hunter x Hunter. So now that we fully understand what's going on with the Jeju Island arc, let's start to talk about why people might be saying that it's copying Hunter x Hunter's notes at least a little bit. See, obviously it's incredibly clear that both the Chimera ants and the ants from Jeju Island are ants. And while the Chimera ants towards the end of their arc look nothing like ants, as they end up just being straight up chameleons, penguins, wolves, gun-toting octopuses, octopi, I apologize. At the end of the day, they're still ants. And the reason they don't look like ants is because of the first part of their name, the Chimera part. See, all of the Chimera ants that we know of were created by the initial Chimera Ant Queen, a 7-ish foot tall ant that was able to consume things and implement traits from the things that she consumed into her children. If she ate a salmon, she would be able to make a salmon ant hybrid. If she ate a turtle or a penguin, she would be able to make a turtle or penguin ant hybrid. Now, naturally, the more things that she consumed, the more traits she had to choose from when making children, which is why the first iteration of Chimera ants look like ants. In fact, the first ever iteration of Chimera ants were only about an inch long, as the first ever iteration of Chimera ants that we saw is when Gon and Killua used a company to fly to Kite's location. And it was in this moment that Gon and Killua came came face to face with the biological threat that Kite was keeping an eye on, which were the primary versions of chimera ants, which look just like regular Earth ants. However, once those chimera ants are able to do something like bite a cow or even a human, they're able to lay eggs that can adapt the traits of those different specimen into their children. And while this is a problem that could absolutely be managed in countries that have a relationship with the Hunter Association in the NGE, which is Hunter x Hunter's version of North Korea, because of their lack of relationship to the Hunter Association, the chimera ants are kind of able to run wild. And thus in basically no time, the chimera ant queen, who washes up into a cave by the ocean, is able to consume enough food that she's able to make chimera ant children that are strong enough to wipe out entire human villages. And as these chimera ants consume more and more humans, their traits become more and more human-like. But I know what some of you are saying, but Nick, the ants from Soul Leveling aren't human-like. And you're right, the majority of ants from Soul Leveling aren't human-like. Well, it's very obviously been established that these ants are able to undergo evolution, as the reason that the fourth raid is even happening in the first place is because the ants have adapted to being on Jeju Island and have grown wings strong enough to fly them to the mainland. We don't necessarily know if this is because they consumed things with wings or if it was just a natural magical beast evolution. But still, there is very much a through line of these ants evolving and that evolution being the problem. It's important to note that the initial chimera ants in Hunter x Hunter also did not have wings. It wasn't until the chimera ants were strong enough to conduct raids against NGE small villages that they were shown to have the ability to fly. And mind you, the ability to fly is also not a unanimous ability amongst the chimera ants. But okay, that's kind of a weak comparison, right? Okay, the ants adapted. That's hardly copying. Well, yeah, that and that alone definitely isn't enough evidence to indict Soul Leveling as a copy of Hunter x Hunter. However, unfortunately, when the Ant King gets introduced, the case does get a bit stronger. See, outside of the fact that a massive story beat in the Chimera Ant arc is the Chimera Ant Queen eventually gathering enough strength to give birth to Meruem, the Chimera Ant King. Meruem's key ability that separates him from all the other Chimera Ants is the fact that his Nen ability is adaptation. See, to this day, we actually don't know what Nen specialty Meruem had. Mostly it's assumed that he was an enhancer because the majority of the skills that he shows off are enhancement Nen abilities, but as he grows stronger and gains access to Nen abilities like Photon after consuming the essence of Shiapoof, he starts to use incredibly high-level emission techniques. And therefore, there's a large contingent of people in the Hunter x Hunter universe who believe that Meruem is a specialist, and that his Nen ability is actually the ability to consume other Nen users and gain their Nen abilities, or some version of them. Like Crollo, but instead of a 5-step plan, it's only one step, and that's eat the brain of the person whose ability you want. And unfortunately for all the Soul Leveling fans out there, that's exactly what the Ant King's ability is. See, the Ant King, outside of being the strongest ant that was ever created by the Ant Queen from the Dungeon Break, also has the ability to steal abilities from those that it consumes. If the Ant King consumes a human, it not only gains the ability to speak, but if that human is also a high-level healer, it also gains the ability to heal itself and possibly other ants. And thus, while it's never been verified in really any way whatsoever that any other ants have the ability to consume other things and gain their abilities, like the Chimera Ant Queen and all of the ants that came from it, the Chimera Ant King does absolutely have a very similar version of an adaptation ability that Meruem had. And the Chimera Ant King is made in a very similar circumstance to the circumstance in which Meruem is created. However, in terms of absolutely condemning and damning similarities, that's kind of it. Yes, Meruem and the Ant King have a lot of similarities, but the Chimera Ant arc and the Jeju Island raid arc could not be more different. While yes, it's introduced that the queen is protected by higher level S-rank strength magical beast Queen's guards, which could possibly be compared to the likes of Yuppie, Shiapoof, and even Pito. In Hunter x Hunter, these high-level guards don't protect the queen, they protect the king. And while this is more a system of the fact that the Chimera Ant Queen dies when the king is born, because Meruem rips himself out of her womb before he's technically ready to be born, at the end of the day, these S-ranked royal guards in Soul Leveling, if you shall, amount to nothing more than other fodder-esque ants, at least relative to S-ranked hunters. And while yes, in the Jeju Island arc, the queen is killed before the king, like in the Chimera Ant arc, the circumstances of all of these respective deaths are massively different from each other. Meruem in Hunter x Hunter is responsible for the death of the queen. He rips himself out of her stomach, which results in injuries so gruesome that she can't recover and eventually dies. While in Soul Leveling, the Ant Queen is actually wiped out by the coalition of S-ranked Korean hunters. And instead of being responsible for the death of the Ant Queen, the Ant King is actually furious about her death, using his anger over her death as a means to fight against the S-ranked Korean champion hunters. On top of this, another point when people are talking about the similarities between Hunter x Hunter and Soul Leveling here is the fact that the circumstances revolving around this ant invasion are somewhat similar. The Hunter Association finally deciding to kick down the door of the NG and investigate what's going on in terms of these giant ants happens because on the shores of a non-NGE country awashes a gigantic ant leg that Kite and the rest of his biological exploration team are able to use to deduce that there is somewhere out there a 6 to 7 foot tall chimera ant. Now, these circumstances are somewhat similar to a winged ant flying its way to the mainland and wiping out a small town before enough A and B ranked hunters are able to work together to wipe it out, as obviously both of these circumstances revolve around an ant appearing on a shore of some country where it didn't come from and spurring a combined effort from the forces at B outside of either Jeju Island or the NGE to work together to wipe out the threat that is in this confined space, but that's an abstract comparison at best. Another abstract comparison that's been being made recently is that while a unified combined effort of people who don't usually work together is sent in both Hunter x Hunter and Soul Leveling to take on this ant threat, one of the parties involved in this combined effort is actually scheming for the other parties involved to die at the hands of said ants. And Hunter x Hunter, it's later revealed that Pariston, who's heavily involved in putting together a strike force of hunters to go take on these chimera ants in the NGE, was most likely actually probably to blame for the chimera ants being in the NGE to begin with. And in Soul Leveling is established that the Japanese hunters that were sent to Korea to join in this combined 16 S-rank hunter strike force were actually only sent to Korea so they could bait out the S-ranked hunters from Korea to Jeju Island so that all of them could die, emaciating Korea's ability to fight back in a geopolitical sense. And thus the Japanese S-ranked hunters involved in this raid never actually intended on wiping out all of the ants on Jeju Island. But once again, this comparison is surface level at best. Fundamentally, the only damning piece of evidence that says Soul Leveling is copying Hunter x Hunter in any capacity whatsoever is the fact that the Ant King and Meruem fundamentally have the same power system and same-ish backstories. But even saying that feels like a gross misunderstanding of the Chimera Ant arc. Let me go ahead and show you just how long the Jeju Island arc is. It is this much of Volume 6 and about half of Volume 7, ending right here, almost exactly halfway through Volume 7. It is not a long arc. There isn't really long arcs in Solo Leveling. The Chimera Ant arc is 80 plus chapters. In fact, the Chimera Ant arc is so incredibly long that a lot of casual Hunter x Hunter fans drop Hunter x Hunter because of how long the Chimera Ant arc is. The Chimera Ant King, who's later known as Beru, is never really established as a character of any real import. There's no real character development, there's no complex storytelling of the Chimera Ant King slowly becoming a human as he plays Go with Komogi. There's no royal guard of any real substance introduced. And a lot of the characters that were introduced to in the Jeju Island arc either don't really do that much or end up dead. So trust me when I say, I'm not sitting here saying that the Jeju Island arc isn't like the Chimera Ant arc because the similarities are too small to be relevant. I'm saying that the Jeju Island arc is nothing like the Chimera Ant arc because the Jeju Island arc is too small to be relatively compared to the Chimera Ant arc. That'd be like saying that Moby Dick copied the Odyssey because they're both stories about long, kind of annoying boat rides. There's definitely similarities there, but fundamentally, they're very different stories. Is the Ant King probably a somewhat direct copy of Meruem? Probably. But does that mean that Solo Leveling is 100% copying the script of Hunter x Hunter? No. Absolutely not. One is a power fantasy manhwa, and the other is a grounded, dark, politically charged story that masquerades as a shonen. They're both great, but for very different reasons. And thus they should both be enjoyed separately and not compared for any real reason. Unless you want to be insufferable. In that case, do you? But I'm curious to hear from you guys. Do you actually believe that there's any merit in the case of calling Soul Leveling a copy of Hunter x Hunter? Let me know in the comments below. And while you guys are down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. One of the benefits of being deeply jet lagged is that you wake up at 4:30 a.m. and I'm already done with the video by 7:30 a.m. What am I gonna do with the rest of today?